Okay, so this is the basics lecture. And I've only just started doing this in these classes because I used to start what we're going to do next week used to be the first week. But I noticed that in some cases, some of my students would, especially in their papers, not know some very basic things about critical thinking. So I thought, well, there's some stuff that I'd like everybody to know, and a lot of it is just sort of what they call common sense, but just to sort of get everybody and sort of get oriented to what the course is, the whole attitude of the course is supposed to be. So I'm doing this basics lecture, which I'm going to talk about stuff that I think is obvious, but which very few people seem to be explicitly taught in high school. So this may be a very boring lecture for many of you, perhaps for all of you. But I'm going to plow ahead. Any questions before I start? Right. So a lot of this, yes, sir.
One question on the paper. It says online says 4 pages. I think you said 2 pages last class.
You said minimum of at least 2, and that's the
Yeah, minimum of at least 2. It's important to remember, my answer to the question of how long should it be is as much as you've got to write. Right? I find it very artificial when someone says, write a 4-page paper on this subject. What if there's more to say than 4 pages? Right? What if I only have 2 pages worth of stuff, but it's really good? So the idea is, well, when people ask me how many pages, I usually just sort of raise the number. So first person asks, I'll say 2.5. Next person asks, I'll say 3. Someone asks me again, I'll say 4. It really is as many as you need to write to get the whole thing across. Now, if you find you've written 4 pages, you can stop. Right? If you've written 4 pages and none of it's padding or fluff or anything like that or commentary, you've written 4 solid pages of factual material that clearly explains what Nancy Keenan is saying in her, NARAL is saying in their press release. You can stop and just say, okay, I wrote 4 pages, I'm out of space, I'm tired, I want to go to bed, I haven't seen my family in 3 days. Right? Just put that at the end and say, I'm stopping here, and I'll pay attention to that. But if you stop after 4 pages, or actually if you stop after 3 pages, it better be pretty solid stuff. I had one student in another class, in my online classes, working ahead, and she wrote her paper, and it was very good. But she kept stopping and making commentaries about what Nancy Keenan is thinking, or what Nancy Keenan is intending to do, right? What she wants. I'm like, don't tell me that. I mean, you might have mind-reading powers, but I don't, and I can't test your mind-reading powers by interviewing. I don't have any way of reading her mind. So don't speculate about what she's thinking or what she wants. You could talk about the audience. Her audience is obviously people who support abortion rights. There's what they call a pro-choice community. So she's writing to them, saying things that they would find interesting, using language that would appeal to them and that would effectively communicate to them. So you might want to translate from her community into regular English. That's good, but no commentary. Did that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So if someone turns in a 2-page paper and it just nails everything, I am not going to take off points for it not being 3 pages. Right? I don't take points off. I don't measure it and say, aha, you're only 2.25 pages. I said 3 pages. I'm docking you 5 points for that extra 3/4 of a page you didn't give me. I'm not going to do that. All right. So, and that's sort of a basic thing about critical thinking. And I think that my personal view is that critical thinking and logic should be taught at least in high school, and that some aspects of critical thinking can be taught in middle school, or even well, someone comes before middle school.
Elementary.
Elementary. Elementary. We call it elementary school, the school system founded by Sherlock Holmes. The elementary schools can teach bits of critical thinking, and that they don't is deeply disturbing to me. So there's a sort of very basic thing. How long should a paper be? It should be as long as it takes to explain, to fulfill the task. Right. And as you go up into university, into graduate school, you'll find your papers, no one's going to tell you how long the paper should be, although they'll get longer. But it'll be, you write the paper, nobody's going to really care about how long it is, as long as it gets the main points, gets everything, and does everything it's supposed to do. And that's sort of the critical thinking attitude. Right. So I'm going to start talking about how I conceive critical thinking, what I think critical thinking requires. This is what I think is the most important thing. Characteristic of a good critical thinking class, everyone will be different. I mean, they'll say basically the same things, but they'll say them differently. And different teachers will have different ideas about what critical thinking is. And hopefully, as we go on in this class, you'll form your own individual ideas about how to think critically, and how to think logically, and how to approach complicated issues. And I'm going to be telling you my model of how to do it, but I'm expecting you to adapt that to your needs and your way of thinking. Right? There's not really one paradigm for how to think critically. They all include attempting to use logic and avoiding logical fallacies, avoiding emotional thinking. But there's not really one paradigm for it. So the first thing that I always look for, that I think is independent thinking. If you've ever encountered someone who thinks what he's supposed to think, who thinks the same as everyone around them, that's not independent thinking. I remember I had this little experience with my daughter when my daughter was, 8 or 9. This was during the last Bush administration. And me and my ex-wife, we're pretty liberal, so we would be slanging George Bush on a regular basis. Bush, rah, 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 rah. And we're doing it all the time. And, and that's okay. But I was disturbed when Marissa's in my car and she starts talking about how horrible Bush is. And I'm like, no, wait, no, is that really your thought? See, and I took the time to explain to her, it's like, look, just because your mom and your dad both detest George Bush, that doesn't mean he's necessarily bad. That doesn't mean you need to think that. Right? You should be making up your own mind. And quite frankly, at your age, probably shouldn't even be thinking about this stuff. Think about stuff you like to think about. It doesn't really matter. And eventually, make up your own mind years down the line. Right? So, and then she stopped slanging Bush, and I felt all parenty. So, but it's really important to have people think independently. And this is one of the booby traps. Have you ever had a teacher tell you they want you to think independently, and then they get mad when you disagree with them? I try not to do that, okay? But if I start throwing a hissy fit because you won't agree with me, point it out, Dr. Young, first thing you said in class, and I'll be all embarrassed. Hopefully I'll be embarrassed. When I was much younger, I used to lose arguments, a lot of arguments. I mean, I still lose arguments, but sometimes I'm wrong. But I used to lose a lot of arguments where I would look up the answer later, or I'd think it through, and I'd realize I was right, but the person I was arguing with was wrong. Why did I lose the argument? And I observed it, and I looked at myself, and I realized what had happened was that I had sort of backed off because the other person was so confident about their beliefs. And I found, and I have the thought, I've seen a lot of people who are really, really ostentatiously confident. And in my experience, the people who are ostentatiously confident, you know, smug, I know better than you, haha, are usually wrong. I mean, not always, it's not an infallible sign, but quite often people make themselves confident about beliefs they're not sure of so that they'll believe it, that they'll feel strong, that the other people will believe them. Confidence is a sort of rhetorical tool. If you speak confidently, people tend to agree with you, whether you're making sense or not. So you should ignore confidence. Don't take it as a bad sign, don't take it as a good sign, don't take it as a sign of anything. You all you need to do is find out the facts. So if I'm really confident about something, but I haven't given you a good reason to agree with me, don't agree with me. And I got to tell you, I have been supremely confident about things that were completely wrong in the past. It was a long time ago. I was young and foolish. But I know I've fallen into the confidence trap. So, I remember in my life that there have been times where I disbelieved things because of my feelings, that I had beliefs that were entirely emotional, or entirely what I felt to be right. I remember the most striking example in my own life was when American states started passing what are called carry laws. Right? A carry law is when the state says you can carry a firearm around with you as long as it's open. Right? You can't get a concealed weapon permit unless you're like, I don't know, detective or have something on the governor. But in many states you can just walk around. You can walk around with a gun on your hip, and I've been in states like that, and I didn't have a gun, and I felt left out. I was best man at a wedding in Arizona. I was the only person there not armed. That's some lunatic friends. But when I first heard this, I had a sort of liberal fit. Oh, the left knee, jerked spasmodically. And said, oh my God, it's going to be Dodge City, there's going to be violence, there's going to be death, No, there wasn't. There was nothing. Nothing. Virtually no change. One or two would-be criminals, muggers, would-be rapists actually got dead, which, good result. I don't know if it's significant enough to be important from a public policy point of view, but basically the results were neutral to good. And I'm like, oh, well. So I had to change my mind. And looking back at it, it seemed at least part of my reaction was just emotional. I just heard that and I thought, okay, I jumped to this conclusion that more guns around means more violence. And no, actually it isn't. I didn't think it through at all. Something else is going on there. So, oops. Now, I don't mean you forget all your pre-existing beliefs all the time. But when you're called to look at a question, the first thing you should really do is take what you think about, or not think about what you already believe, not let your pre-existing beliefs form a part of your deliberation. Sort of put those aside. They may turn out to be true, they may turn out to be false, but you try to look at it anew, as though you're approaching it from for the first time. In Zen Buddhist practice, there's this idea of beginner's mind. Have you ever heard that? This idea of beginner's mind is trying to achieve a mental state when you're approaching anything as though you've never seen it before and you're examining it from all angles. And if you can achieve this mental state, you step back and say, you know, I used to believe a whole bunch of stuff about this. I'm going to try and put that aside, look at this from the ground up, and work out what I believe based on the available facts. And it's actually, in any thinking process or anything, always be willing to change your mind in response to new facts, in response to stuff that's new, or new thinking about stuff. I recently had a little realization about Governor Chris Christie. And it's a realization about something that happened like 2 years ago. I'm not quick, I gotta tell you. I think I'm pretty smart, but I'm not quick. And it took me like 2-3 years to realize this. I really liked Chris Christie at about the superstorm. So I remember him in his windbreaker and stuff. And the Republican Party, Mitt Romney was running for president, and the Republican Party was asking Chris Christie to say bad things about President Obama, and he refused. And he's like, you know, if you expect me to worry about presidential politics right now, you don't know me. And I'm thinking, wow, impartial, you know, integrity, yay. Okay, 2 years after he said that, I realized something. If Mitt Romney won the presidency in 2012, Chris Christie, as a Republican, could not run against a Republican incumbent in 2016. For Chris Christie to become president in 2016, he needs there to be a Democrat in the White House. Otherwise, if Mitt Romney was in the White House, he'd be an incumbent. So there's a motivation there for him, and there's motivation there for Chris Christie to say, no, you know, oh no, I'm not going to come up and help Mitt Romney because I want to be president in 4 years. So I don't know. I mean, that's pure speculation, right? Just because I offered that as an explanation for Christie's statement, it doesn't mean it's the only explanation. Another explanation is he was right on the level. That's another explanation, and I don't know anything to positively rule that out. So I could be completely wrong about this. But I'm not wrong about the fact that it took me 2 years to think of it. Unfortunately. So, now this might be kind of redundant with the independent thinking thing, so maybe this is me just emphasizing this. I teach intro to philosophy classes, and there's a couple of writing assignments I give that get the same types of failure again and again, and I have to rewrite my prompts to say, you know, basically don't do this. And there's one prompt about the question of whether Sigmund Freud did not believe in free will. And there's a couple of people who think that Sigmund Freud denied or Sigmund Freud's theory implied that free will doesn't exist. And I think this is rubbish. I hate Freud, but I don't think he thought this. And So there's this chapter in the book, this section in the book, 2-3 pages, where it goes through all what all these people think. And I look at it and I think, well, that's just rubbish. And so I wrote this essay prompt saying, look at these 2 pages and figure out, read the arguments for Freud being a thing, and figure out if they're good arguments. And remember that thing, figure out if they're good arguments. Right? Think independently and critically about it. And inevitably, at least the first 2-3 years I would give this topic, some student would take this and then he or she would paraphrase all the stuff that's said, and when they'd got through paraphrasing what the section said, they stopped. And it was basically, Freud is a hard determinist because this guy says he is, and then it's kind of a little different because this other guy says, so this guy says this guy says this guy says this guy says this, and I just want to, and I would give them a bad grade and say, okay, I need you to personally think about this. There's this argument. He says Freud must be a hard determinist because of this. Is this a good argument? Don't just tell me what the book says. Right? Tell me whether this is a good argument or not, and just take that step back and look at it and say, does this work? And and you've got to do that work of thinking. And so much, if you read political stuff, you read newspaper stuff, so many people just do not do that work. They don't look at the facts and draw inferences from them. They just say what everybody else says. I remember, do you remember the Zimmerman affair, right, the Trayvon Martin thing? It's a big liberal red button thing, and you have liberals going off and on about it, and there's a lot of complications in that case, because one thing was they tried to portray Zimmerman as racist, right? And they had this conversation reported in New York Times. I don't know if it was New York Times. It was some newspaper on that blog where you have, yeah, he's in a hoodie, blah, ... he's black, ... like, oh look, he's identifying the guy by race. Well, in the ... there's the police dispatcher saying, and what race is he? He's black. He was specifically asked that information, but the quote left that out. So if I listen to liberal radio and stuff, and if I let that do my thinking, I'd be saying, oh my God, Zimmerman's a racist. He shot an unarmed black teenager. ... What am I leaving out after he shot an unarmed black teenager? I'm leaving out the fact that the unarmed black teenager was bigger than him, was kneeling on his chest, and was banging his head against the pavement. Now, maybe, you know, in that situation, you shouldn't shoot people. But I tell you, I would. If someone was doing that to me, I would shoot them if I could. You know, I'd shoot them several times. Right. I'd empty the mag into them. It's just so you see this. You see this way. This is the way this is constructed, and it was just incredibly embarrassing for me as a liberal to see all the bullshit, word I can't say in class, coming out of my side of the political fence over that thing. Oh, and by the way, stand your ground had nothing to do with it. There was no stand your ground defense in that.
Really?
Yeah. So that's, you know, do your own research. I've gotten myself into trouble on Facebook on numerous occasions by reposting stuff that I didn't research first. Also embarrassing. Right. Leads me to be willing to be wrong. I've mentioned at least one thing I was wrong about today. I've been wrong about any number of things. And the idea, well look, your most important cognitive faculty is your ability to change your mind. That's the most important cognitive faculty you've got. There are people out there who are incapable, who will not change their minds. I won't say they're incapable of it, they just choose never to do it. And there's a technical term for such people, morons. And it's all political stripes. I think the dumbest person I ever met was a liberal. He had a degree and he was all speaking all pompous and that, and he was just saying insane things. And I had no idea that he could be wrong about anything. So that's, if you're willing to be wrong, what that means is you're willing to change your mind in the face of contrary evidence and to say, okay, I was wrong. Oops, I'm wrong, I'm a lie. Oops, I got it wrong. You were right, which is often very difficult to say, but you've got to be willing to admit that you were wrong about something. Only when the evidence supports this, right? I used to say I was wrong when the other person was just really confident and pushy, and that's not right. I think I'm trying to get out of that habit. You want to stick to your guns when you think you've got good reason to. Right, so that's the sort of the independent thinking thing. Okay. At the end of this semester, at the end of this class, if I've done my job right, you guys will have a good idea of what logic is, if I've done it right. At this point, probably most of you have some idea of what logic is, and what logical thinking is, how to think, how logical thinking proceeds, but it takes about a semester to really fully explain what is meant by the idea of thinking logically and how to do it. It's sort of like thinking how to maintain and repair air conditioners. Right? We know that air conditioners need maintenance and repair. We don't know specifically how to do it at the beginning of the course, and at the end we know more. I mean, you know, some of you probably think pretty logically already. This is just sort of, this is training and techniques. A lot of training and techniques. All right, any questions before I go on to the next bit? You sure? All right. All right, so what's not logic? Well, now, if you ever get a chance to take a class in rhetoric from a teacher who believes in classical rhetoric, and it's the kind of rhetoric that was studied by the Greeks and Romans, or is based on the rhetoric of the Greeks and Romans, I really recommend it, because I had a classical rhetoric class and I really enjoyed it. I think I learned a lot from it. And the reason to learn rhetoric is to improve communication skills, to be able to communicate with other people, to get through to them. Have you ever noticed and known people who had a reality shield? Even with the smartest, most self-aware people, there's issues in communication. Maybe you know someone where there's just some things you can't tell them, or there's things you can't tell them unless you phrase it exactly right. And when I have something complicated to explain to something, or something that's sort of new or different or scary, I stop and I think, okay, what am I going to tell this person first? How am I going to build up the background to this? How am I going to get this across so that the other person understands what I'm saying? And studying rhetoric is a good way to build up your skills for communicating with people and for sort of stirring their engaging their emotions, getting them to see, at least see how you feel about it. So that's the sort of the light side of rhetoric. The dark side is that rhetorical tricks can be used to persuade people to believe things that are not true. And one of the things that we'll study in this class again and again is sort of rhetorical tricks, or things that are used, ways of speaking that get people to believe things that are not true. Believe, or more technically, believe things that are not supported by the evidence. Okay. For me, I use the word true and supported by all the available evidence kind of interchangeably, because I don't actually see any difference between the concepts. But so we want to avoid rhetoric, dig through rhetoric to get to the fact. And that's this first writing assignment, as what's your name again?
Mike.
Mike, as Mike pointed out, it's political rhetoric. This is a person speaking, doing political speech, speaking to a particular audience with a political goal in mind, trying to essentially, basically mobilize the troops, get people out to vote, get people to hand over money, donate, to speak, march, or do whatever it is that political people do. I don't know. It's too much like work for me. I sort of cheer from the sidelines. Yay! Yeah, I give moral support. So the task here is not to be swayed by the rhetoric, to be able to step back, right? Not to be swayed and not to be offended, because if her political views are the opposite of yours, you know, a lot of what she's going to say is going to be offensive to you. But to be able to step back from that and look and say, hey, okay, that's her rhetoric. What are her factual claims? What is she actually saying? There's certain languages and ways of talking and nicknames and things that things get. What exactly is she saying? What is she referring to? What is she saying about this? So one way of looking at this is to say, you're going to take this piece of political rhetoric and change it to neutral, matter-of-fact language, so that it's not inflammatory. And so you look at it, and you look at it in a very matter-of-fact way. You're not for it, you're not against it. Your own emotions, your own feelings, your own beliefs are put aside, and you just say, figure out what this person is saying. All right, so that's the sort of the first task here, is to be able to dig through a set of political rhetoric and translate it into just neutral, matter-of-fact language. Does that make sense? Right. All right. So, and you can comment on the emotional color of the words, as long as you're commenting, you're specifically talking about what she's actually saying, rather than talking about what she's trying to do, or what she's thinking, or what she believes but isn't saying. Right? As long as you're sticking to what she says, to explaining what she says, and maybe commenting on how she's saying it and what words she's using, word choice and so on. Right? But primarily it's the factual claims I'm most interested in. Right. So, I wanted to say a word about badgering. Have you ever had someone try to bully you into believing something? Yeah, that's not logic.
Only when I was right and they were wrong.
Oh, good. So if someone's badgering you, that means they're wrong. And often, I mean, it is a red flag. If someone won't stop and discuss facts and they want to keep yelling at you, then it's time to move on. I guess I want to put in a word for being willing to tolerate disagreement. I have a lot of friends who are conservative, Republican, Christian, Catholic, Irish. I was going to say, my girlfriend and I are historical reenactors. She's just getting into it. And there's this group we really like, and we were just invited to come hang out with them at some of their events. They reenact the Irish Republican Army of 1919 through 1921. It is freaking awesome. The best clothes, the fashions in 1920 were awesome. And they carry the rifles, and the leader's got a Tommy gun, and we get so drunk. I once got Tristan drunk on ginger cordial, so he remembers me for that. So, but actually, what's the cool thing is the way they talk about the history of the Irish Revolution is through song. They have a little songbook that they hand out to people, and we sing the songs and stuff. And it's like, oh, I learned something. So. Right. So now I'm going to start talking about what is logic. Logic means thinking about arguments, and an argument is the most basic concept in logic. An argument, in this class, I'm using the word argument to refer to any attempt to persuade you, any attempt to get you to change your mind. Anyone who tries to get you to change your mind about something, to believe something that you do not presently believe, is making an argument. It may be a good argument, it may be a bad argument, and that's what the difference between the two is what this class is about. Largely, the logic part of this class is about being able to tell the difference between good arguments and bad arguments. So we're going to talk a lot about arguments in this class. All right. So I'm going to give you some technical terms, and it's kind of weird because there's this diagram that we use, what we call standard form. We talk about an argument as having one or more premises and a conclusion. These are technical terms. And the conclusion is the thing they want you to believe. Right, so the conclusion is the thing they want you to believe, and it's the first thing you would recognize in an argument, is you try and figure out the conclusion. And sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard. Usually it can be picked out by context. So that's the conclusion. The conclusion is what they're trying to get you to believe, the thing you don't believe. Premises, maybe one or more premises, are reasons, one or more reasons given to persuade you. So they want you to believe something, and they give you reasons to believe it. And so that's the thing. And the first step of analysis, you guys know what analysis means? It means to break up, to break things down into parts so that they can be looked at and compared and see how they fit together. And the first part of analysis, the first step of analysis is you break an argument down into conclusion and premises. And this is called a standard form, is you write the reasons, you make a list of the reasons, and then you draw a line and you put the conclusion in, which is weird because the conclusion is actually the first thing you figure out, but you've got to write it at the bottom of the diagram. So logic is thinking about arguments. It means thinking about attempts to persuade you and whether they're logically good or bad, which means do the premises give you a good reason to believe the conclusion. Now I'm going to define some terms here. Now these terms are kind of used loosely, but I want to give them some solid definition here because they're often very, they're often, well not maybe not often, but at least sometimes they're misused. Right, so I want to talk about facts, opinion, and judgment. So, fact, opinion, judgment. So, if somebody calls something a fact, what this should mean, and certainly what it means in this class, is that it's something everybody can verify, that it's something that's agreeable, that it's, well, let's see. Let's talk about some facts. Well, there's a fact that this room is lighted. It's not pitch dark here, that's a fact. It's a fact I'm holding a bottle. It's a fact that the liquid inside is red. It's an unfortunate fact that the liquid inside is non-alcoholic, which you could verify. Well, it actually doesn't say. It says caffeine-free, but it doesn't say non-alcoholic. But I got some ginger beer in here too. Sure. This Reed's Extra Ginger, it's one of my favorite things. And it says on the label non-alcoholic. So, well, it's a fact that it says on the label that it's non-alcoholic. I guess my experience of never having gotten drunk from drinking this supports that claim.
Is there pieces of ginger in there? Little flakes?
I think so. Look, it's all cloudy and stuff. Yeah, so it's pretty tasty. A lot of people can't drink this. It's too gingery for them.
Where do you get that?
Trader Joe's, and there's other places too. I like it a lot. And it goes very well with Maker's Mark or Bullet Bourbon. Right. So this is stuff that you can observe. And if you go out at night on a clear night, it's a fact that in our night sky, quite usually there's 3 little stars in a row, and then spaced out there's 4 other stars that are sort of form a box around them, and there's a couple of little stars dinging down this, and this is referred to by astronomers as the constellation of Orion, which for me is the easiest constellation to pick out. Now, on the way other side is opinion, which is just stuff people believe. So, opinion, I mean, an opinion is something somebody thinks. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. There's nothing wrong with having opinions. But it's just stuff people believe. If something is just an opinion, it means just that we believe it. It's not a fact. It's not something that everyone can independently verify. It's not something that has been proved. It's just an opinion. Now, there's something very curious about this that I see every so often, and it was really weird for me the first time this happened. I would get papers in critical thinking classes, in philosophy classes. I just had one in my upper division philosophy class at Cal Poly, where a writer, a student will say, this person has the facts, but this other person is only giving his opinion. And then they stop. Like, that's their argument. He's got the facts, he's only giving his opinion. And I'm like, okay, tell me what the facts are, tell me how they're proven, how they're verified, and tell me and explain what this guy is saying so you can establish that it's just his opinion. But they don't do that. And it seems that there are some people out there who are sort of, that this is a sort of mantra, that they'll take the side they agree with and say it's got the facts, and take the side they disagree with and say, oh, that's just his opinion. Have you ever made a case to someone and you give a lot of facts, you give an argument, you give evidence, and they say, oh, well, that's just your opinion? Well, this is the sort of mental gymnastics to try and avoid accepting that someone is giving facts. It's always just your opinion. I had an extreme case last semester where a student was comparing two papers, right, on a particular topic, and one paper cited a lot of references. It had a lot of footnotes. There's an article online. There's a lot of footnotes. There was references to scientific studies. There was references to newspaper and magazine articles. And the other had nothing. No evidence whatsoever. Nothing stated, no evidence stated. And she said, one of them has the facts and the other is just giving his opinion. But the one that had the facts was the one that gave no evidence. And the one who was just stating his opinion was the one who actually gave lots of footnotes and backed everything up with links and with references to articles where you could look up the data. And so it seemed like this was a sort of knee-jerk reaction or something, like that there's something some people sometimes do instead of thinking. Right. So, and I try very hard not to say that someone's just giving their opinion. Right? I try and figure out what the facts are and stuff. Yeah. And in between, there's this thing I call judgment. And the reasoning very carefully and honestly from the facts to new conclusions. So, I guess in science, you look at a set of facts and you try and figure out a way of explaining those facts by positing a new rule or a law of nature. One example was that, I don't know, maybe 100 years ago, maybe a little longer, a scientist in a lab noticed that some photoreactive chemical that had been kept sealed had reacted as though it had been exposed to light, even though it had not been exposed to light. And he had no idea why this happened, but he also knew that there was a new chemical in his lab that had just been brought in. I think it was pitchblende. And he did some experiments, and it turned out that this new mineral would fog the photoreactive chemical. Basically, it's like fogging. You remember the old chemical photographs where you had the roll of film and stuff? Right? It would fog photographic film. They had no idea that this was possible until then. And then he came up with the explanation that there was something radiating out, going out in all directions from the object that was affecting this. That there was action at a distance, which nobody believed in up until then. And so he was reasoning from a set of facts, from observed facts that anyone could verify, to this radical new conclusion that there's such a thing as radiation, which is invisible particles or forces that come out from certain objects and spread out into the surrounding space. And so that's the story of the discovery of radiation. And it doesn't sound very radical now, but 200 years ago, the idea of radiation would have been an insane idea. So a judgment is when you is when you look at the facts and come to a conclusion. And judgments can be right or wrong. And I made my judgment as to what I think is the reason, or what I think might be the reason that Chris Christie did not help out Mitt Romney in the last election. You know, and I'm not particularly confident about that judgment. It's the kind of judgment that once I say it out loud, kind of want to back off from it a little. So maybe put it in the maybe pile. But you make judgments all the time, right? You look at certain kinds of facts, and sometimes you realize stuff. Right? You ever had that thing, like a realization about the way somebody's behaving, the way a certain set of things are happening, and you go, oh my God, you know, that guy's stealing, or that person really likes me, but not in a good way, or stuff like this. Or sometimes I have a realization, my God, this person I'm talking to is a screaming idiot. Like that. So, right, so that something can be a fact, it can be an opinion, or it can be a judgment. And when something's a judgment, it's still kind of debatable, and we still think about it. And it's a fact, we don't really need to think about it because anyone can look and verify it. Right, now, whether any individual claim we might make is fact, judgment, or opinion, that can be, you know, something could be on the border between a judgment or, you know, there are borderline cases. So these are fairly loose categories. But I want to use the word fact for something that's absolutely established. There's no real point in doubting it. And I want to use opinion for stuff that's basically believed because we want to believe it. Right? If I say, well, my opinion is, if I say something's my opinion, it's like, well, basically I agree, I believe this, but I don't know that I could say anything that would convince you. But if I say, okay, in my judgment, if I claim that I have made a judgment, then I should be able to give you a set of reasons that you might find convincing. You might say, okay, I don't agree, but I can see how you thought of that, right? There's a thinking process. Does that make sense? Right, I hope it does. Because I spent a lot of time explaining it. It doesn't make sense. I just wasted like 20 minutes. So, got this example in the, oh god, there's a long discussion in the text, so you should be able to get that. All right. So, I write essay prompts for my classes, and I've been doing it for quite a while. And I was a reader for for classes at UC Irvine, where I would have to talk to students about stuff. And I had a student come to see me, and she said, "Okay, this is how the essay works, right? The first thing is the one guy's opinion and all his arguments. And the second thing is the other guy's opinion and all his arguments. And the third bit is just my opinion." And I said, "Well, no, not really, because if it's your opinion, it's got to be your considered opinion about the strength and weakness of the arguments given." And she seemed to have the impression that she gives one guy's opinion, one guy's views, argument and stuff, what one guy says, then the other one, and then puts those aside and just writes down what she happens to think, without thinking about the evidence and without thinking about the available arguments. And that's not what I'm talking about when I use the word think. If I say, "What do you think?" I mean I want you to look at the arguments on both sides of this issue and do your best to come to a well-considered judgment. I had a student once tell me, "You can't mark my answer wrong. You asked me what do I think, and this is what I think." And I said, "Well, you think wrongly." "Yeah, but it's still what I think." So to try and never have that happen again. All right. So, sometimes we use the word evidence instead of facts. It's a sort of difference in emphasis. You might say, "What is the evidence?" In court, right, they use this word evidence, they're giving evidence. But they also talk about the facts of the case. In critical thinking, in logic, when we talk about evidence, we basically mean the facts. We mean what is already proven, what can be taken for granted, what is not worth disputing. Right. So that's basically facts. Did that make sense? I'm kind of using them interchangeably. Here's a sort of a technical word. Have you guys heard the word empirical before? Right, empirical generally means about the world or based on observation. An empirical claim is a claim about the universe. I can make an empirical claim that there are no cubical gas giants. That's a claim about the universe. Now, it's a very bold claim in one sense because the universe is big. Our galaxy is huge compared to this planet. The local group is huge compared to this galaxy, and space itself is, freaking enormous. It's mind-boggling how big it is. And yet I'm claiming that in all all of space, and all of space and time, there are no gas giant planets in the shape of a cube. But I think this is a pretty safe bet, because what I know about physics, right? Because gas is a fluid, it flows, and a gas giant, you know why planets are spherical? You know, why planets, at least not dwarf planets so much, but planet-sized planets like Earth, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, why are they oblate spheroids?
Because gravity's consistent.
Right, because gravity is consistent. Gravity pulls them into a sphere. Because every bit of matter in this planet pulls on every other bit of matter in this planet. And some of the bits flow, particularly when Earth was molten. It flowed, and all the heaviest elements tended to gravitate towards the center. You know, the center of the Earth's core is made of nickel iron. It's a mixture of iron and nickel. And there's been some mixing and turbulence and things. There's magma currents and things like that. Currents in the mantle that move stuff around. But generally, Earth's gravity pulls it into a sphere, but it's slightly flattened because it's spinning. Right? Angular momentum pushes the equator out and it takes that out there. So, right, if you ever magically made a cubical gas giant, it would instantly collapse to a sphere. Because that's the highest entropy state, that's the lowest energy state. Right, so that's an empirical claim based on other empirical claims like observations of fluids, material science, what we know about gravity, the force of universal gravitation, Newtonian physics, and more particularly Einsteinian physics, the theory of special relativity, and so on. So you won't get this. You always going to get this. So that's an empirical claim. It's a claim about the universe. So any claim that something exists or doesn't exist, or that something is square or cubical or tetrahedral, or shapes or nature or behavior, anything about the world is an empirical claim. Empirical truth is best established empirical. Something's empirically true if all the relevant evidence supports it well, there's abundant evidence. So that's what I mean about empirical truth, or what I mean by truth. That if I say something is true, that means I think that there's a very, very good argument for it, that there's no good argument against it, that all the evidence supports it, there's no evidence against it, and we've had plenty of opportunity to find evidence against it. Did that make sense? Now, I kind of hesitate to say that anything is to say that things are true, or to say that an argument is good, because empirical reasoning is very tentative and uncertain. And so what I'm talking about logic and arguments here is I'm not really going to tell you about arguments that are perfect. I don't think there are any, actually. But I'm not going to talk about arguments that are really, really strong. Rather, I'm going to try to teach you how to tell when an argument is really, really weak. And so when I give you exercises, next week we'll be doing exercises about sampling arguments. I'm not going to ask you which is the good argument and which is the bad argument. I'm going to ask you which is the weaker argument. And I'm trying to write these exercises so that one argument is significantly and noticeably weaker than the other argument. So that you have practice at picking out bad arguments. How do you tell if an argument is good? Well, an argument is good when we can't find anything wrong with it. How much confidence do we have in that judgment? Well, it depends how much logic we know. I've been studying logic for, nearly 20 years. God, I'm old. But I've been hanging around with logic for nearly 20 years. And in many cases, I have a high confidence that I can tell that an argument's good. Many cases, not all cases. When an argument's clearly bad, I have more confidence, and there's more bad arguments than good arguments. So having confidence in an opinion, I try to hold all my opinions tentatively, and I'm always willing to back off and change my mind when new evidence comes up, or old evidence turns out to be interpretable in a new way. Right? There's new things to think about. So I'm never absolutely certain that anything's true. But I am absolutely certain that some things are false. Well, not absolutely, but I am pretty darn confident that some things are false. And that's the way it is. And, when you're talking about empirical truth or empirical claims, you have to get used to uncertainty, because there's always a little bit of uncertainty. Maybe not noticeably, right? I think it's pretty clear that there's other stars, other planets, other stars in there's other planets in our solar system, that there's other stars out there, right? There's some things that that are so well established it's not worth arguing. But did that make sense? Because I thought I got kind of incoherent in the middle there. Okay, so now a crucial concept in logic is the concept of support. Now, support is a relationship between claims, but to make things easier to understand, I'm going to talk about facts more. So we'll say we have a fact. The fact is there's little white paw prints across your living room carpet. So that's your fact. That's the least disgusting example I could think of concerning domestic animals. How many of you have pets? How many of you have pets who have done something absolutely disgusting? Yeah, you know what I mean. Okay. So we'll just stick with little white paw prints. That's just, least of our problems. A fact supports a conclusion if because I'm trying to distinguish support from proof, so I've got to phrase this very carefully. A fact supports a conclusion if it is difficult to reasonably explain the fact without accepting the conclusion. So a container of flour has been knocked over on your kitchen counter. There's little white paw prints all over the living room carpet. You you own a cat, you only own one cat, you do not own a dog or any other pawed animal, what's the most reasonable conclusion? That the cat got into the flower. Right. Now, that supports the conclusion, and if you can eliminate every other explanation, it's proof. But suppose you've got some very clever raccoons living next door and you lost your house keys 2 weeks ago. Maybe the raccoons learned how to use keys and got into there. Maybe these are raccoon prints. We have raccoons, by the way. They're always getting into the dumpsters in our complex. Right. So, if you can, so another way of thinking about support is a fact supports a conclusion. If that fact makes that conclusion more likely to be true. If you've been following the Chris Christie corruption scandal, there's a conclusion that I just leaped to. I mean, I just jumped to this conclusion almost right away, that Chris Christie is deeply corrupt. That's an opinion, right? It's not a fact. It's certainly not a fact. And I would hope that at least half of you disagree with me, right? But I keep hearing stuff, and there's stuff about the allegation that he withheld Sandy relief funds from, was it Hoboken, because the mayor there wouldn't sign off on a development he wanted, or that his staff wanted. And I just heard today a huge chunk of Sandy money went to a developer making a vast apartment building complex with amenities and things. $4.3 million of Hurricane Sandy relief funds went to this guy, where there's still people living who are homeless because of the storm. And just every day a new revelation, and all his top staff people are being subpoenaed and pleading the Fifth Amendment. They're refusing to testify because they might incriminate themselves. Not because they might incriminate themselves, but they have this right not to testify on the grounds that it might, that's whatever the Fifth means. So each one of those suggests Christie's corrupt. As they add up, right, there's more and more support for the thing as you hear about it. By the way, Chris Christie, the described behavior is not unique to Christie. Apparently everyone in New Jersey behaves like this. Chris Christie is apparently just very good at it. But is this proof? Not in a court of law, at least. And in my best judgment, it still could turn out that Christie is not corrupt, that there's a reasonable explanation for each and every one of these incidents. So I'm saying that it's the idea that he's corrupt is supported by the evidence, but I'm not going to go so far as to say it's proved. So here's my definition of proof or proved. A conclusion is proved if and only if it is the only reasonable I gotta add bits. if it's a good explanation, not just a reasonable explanation, but a good explanation, if it well explains all the available all the available evidence, I can't think of how to do the next bit. I'm kind of assuming that there is evidence, that there's quite a bit of evidence, right? There's not just one or two little things, there's quite a bit of evidence, so which there's plenty of. And it is the only, I'm going to say remotely, reasonable explanation. So there's what I might call a pretty a high standard of proof. We want to set a high standard of proof. Something's only proved if there's quite a bit of evidence. There's no place that evidence could be hiding. I say all the available evidence, but if there's evidence locked up in files and stuff, it's like, you ever see this on cop shows or legal dramas where the it turns out that the prosecution has withheld evidence from the defense, and the evidence turns out to prove that the guy didn't do it, right? If somebody's hiding evidence, or there's some evidence that we can't get to, that makes it less likely that we have proof. Okay. So this is sort of a judgment call kind of thing, and after the break, we'll talk more about this. So, okay, back in like 12 minutes, 8:15.